Dictatorships can be traced back to 510 BC, when the office of the dictator was first created by the Roman Senate for emergency purposes. Emergency purposes like taking care of rebellions. The dictators held authority over all politicians, but couldn't be held legally responsible for their actions. And that seems to be the case even today. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a look at the physics of dictatorships. That is, how do dictatorships really start, and how are they maintained? Usually, economic or social crises lead to dictatorships. Why? Because there's a need for change. The perception is that the current policy execution has not yielded results, so something strong is needed which is not bound by the constraints of the legal framework. And dictatorships fit this bill. But as in the case of the Roman example, the dictator's tenure was temporary. The dictators in ancient Rome could not hold office beyond 6 months, and they usually left office as soon as their tasks were complete, well before the 6-month deadline. Dictatorships fall into different categories, and one of the prominent categories are the military dictatorships. These usually start with the military toppling an inept regime. In many countries of the world, the military looks upon itself as the ultimate protector of the nation. So when a democratically elected government creates economic or social chaos, sometimes an ambitious military commander steps in and topples the regime via a coup. Pakistan is a great example of this form of dictatorship, but Pakistan has mostly had military dictators with small interludes of democracy. The problem here is that it's not just one military commander who's ambitious. The entire military establishment has now tasted power and has found it difficult to let go of its grip on power when a democratic government is in place. And that is one interesting characteristic of a dictatorship. It's really very challenging to get rid of a dictatorship and reintroduce democracy. Some countries have had some success, and some have failed. And talking of military dictatorships, one of the longest and most brutal military dictatorship that the world has witnessed has been Spain under General Francisco Franco. General Franco can be looked upon as one of the leaders of the Spanish Civil War that lasted between 1936 and 39. It is a bit of an anomaly to call the Spanish Civil War a civil war because one of the sides in the war was the military. The Spanish Civil War started when a group of army officers conspired to seize power, fearing that the liberal government of Spain would give way to a Marxist revolution. After some initial hesitation, General Francisco Franco agreed to lead the Spanish military officers, who came to be known as the Nationalists, against Spain's leftist Republican government. But as each side strived to gain the upper hand in the conflict, both of them indulged in mass killings of the opposing side. So the Nationalists gunned down several thousands of Republicans during the course of the conflict, while the Republicans murdered their own share of political opponents. By the time the Civil War ended in 1939, about 1 million lives had been lost in the conflict. With the end of the Civil War, Franco served as the dictator of Spain until his death in 1975. Though he was a military dictator, Franco built a cult around his personality, which to a great extent ensured his longevity. And a parallel can be drawn with China's Mao Zedong, who assumed power in 1949 and built a cult around his personality, which facilitated him staying in power till his death in 1976. One point to note here is that though Franco was leading the military, he had additional military support from Germany and Italy, who supplied an abundance of planes, tanks, and arms. Interestingly, the Republican side had the backing of the Soviet Union. And this brings us to the second category of dictatorships, which is the dynastic civilian dictatorship, aka a modern monarchy. And one of the best examples in this category is North Korea. The first leaders of any newly formed country usually are looked upon with a lot of awe and pride. And sometimes they exploit this and, without the citizenry realizing, pass on the baton to the next generation. And once that happens, a civilian dynastic dictatorship is established. In case of North Korea, Kim Il-sung was the first leader put into power by the Soviet Union. The Korean peninsula had been divided into two zones, North and South, between the Soviets and the Americans. Initially, the Soviets preferred Cho Man-sik to lead the government in North Korea, but Cho refused to support a UN-backed trusteeship and clashed with Kim, and subsequently Kim Il-sung was put in charge of North Korea. And since that day, the seat of the head of the government in North Korea has been occupied by 3 generations of the Kim family. Besides North Korea, countries like Cuba and Syria fall in this category. And that brings us to the most dangerous of them all, the democratically elected dictator. Russia's Vladimir Putin, Turkey's Erdogan, and Hungary's Viktor Orban fall in this category. Adolf Hitler, too, the most dangerous and evil of them all, falls in this category since he was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933 after ending a close second to the 84-year-old Paul von Hindenburg in the nation's presidential elections. The reason this category is considered most dangerous is because democratic institutions of legislature and judiciary continue to exist side by side with the executive. But they are completely in control of the executive. Specifically, the judiciary being in control of the executive ensures that the person supposedly elected democratically can be an authoritarian without anybody questioning the legitimacy of that power. So, how do dictators stay in power? The basic strategy used is to prevent their citizens from thinking. Whoa, wait. How can anybody prevent their citizens from thinking? Well, different approaches are utilized from the extreme to subtle to ensure that this happens. The extreme ones include measures like extermination or incarceration of dissent, and these were typically used by authoritarians like Joseph Stalin and Cambodia's Pol Pot. In fact, Cambodia's Pol Pot took it to such an extreme that he evacuated 2.5 million residents of Cambodia's capital Phnom Penh and forced them to toil in the fields as part of a re-education process. And these residents included former civil servants, doctors, teachers, and other professions. Authoritarians are most paranoid about the educated class. And the best way to prevent the educated class from thinking is to create fear. And fear is created through the arrest, torture, or killing of anyone who voices an opinion against the authoritarian. So while Pol Pot suppressed the voice of dissent from the common citizen, Germany's Adolf Hitler ordered a bloody purge of his own political party, assassinating hundreds of Nazis whom he believed had the potential of becoming his political enemies in the future. And the event became known as the Night of the Long Knives. and it happened between 30th of June and 2nd of July 1934. Now, one of the very interesting characteristics of the democratically elected dictator is that they tend to consolidate their power over a period of time. And the best example of this is Russia's Vladimir Putin, who for the first 2 terms gave the impression of a proper democrat and gradually started manipulating the constitution of Russia to ensure a lifelong term in office. And the reason the consolidation is gradual is because it takes some time to replace the civil servants, the officials in the existing bureaucratic machinery with cronies of the aspiring authoritarian. So the democratic institutions still exist. It's just that they are full of loyalists to the authoritarian, so highly unlikely to go against the wishes and decree of the authoritarian in power. Adolf Hitler, though, did not take much time to consolidate his power, taking advantage of the old and weak President Hindenburg. After a suspicious fire in the German Reichstag, Hitler convinced President Hindenburg to pass an emergency law curbing personal liberties. This allowed Hitler to imprison the opposition leaders, giving him enough votes in the legislature to pass the Enabling Act, the law that gave Hitler the right to make laws without the legislature's approval for the next 4 years. And the rest is history. And once power is consolidated, the dictator is able to push through their agenda blatantly without any opposition. After Spain's Franco assumed power, many Republican figures fled the country, and those that stayed were tried by various military tribunals that were set up for this purpose. Thousands of more Spaniards were sent to their deaths, and Franco himself admitted in the mid-1940s that he had about 26,000 political prisoners under lock and key. Franco made Catholicism the only tolerated religion, banned the Catalan and Basque languages outside the home, forbade Catalan and Basque names for newborns, barred labor unions, and created a vast secret police network to spy on the citizens. Highly ambitious authoritarians also like to build a cult around their personality to seek complete obedience from their citizens. North Korea's Kim family falls in that category. In fact, North Korea had an industrial advantage over the South at the time of its formation. But Kim Il-sung remodeled North Korean society along the lines of Juche, that is, a nationalist ideology promoting Korean autonomy. The state seized control of all private property and organizations, which meant all businesses belonged to the North Korean state. Pyongyang was built as its socialist capital, and numerous monuments and statues of Kim Il-sung sprung up around North Korea, and Kim Il-sung took on the title of Supreme Leader. Not to be outdone, his son and successor, Kim Jong-il, took on the title Dear Leader. And the current incumbent, Kim Jong-un, is referred to as respected leader or respected comrade. Looking at dictators from another angle, there are dictators who are focused on longevity and extension of their reign across generations. And then there are dictators who are obsessed with promoting an ideology. The ones pushing an ideology are usually the craziest ones. Crazy ones like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. This category of dictators do not take much time to consolidate their power so that they can quickly start pushing through their ideology. So we've talked about military dictatorships, the democratically elected dictators, and the dynastic civilian dictatorships. There are also a few dictatorships that kind of follow a hybrid model. hybrid model like a military junta, or maybe an authoritarian supplemented by a democracy. Iran is one such example of this hybrid model where the overall institutions in the country are overseen by the supreme leader or the Ayatollah. The supreme leader appoints the senior officers of the military as well as the members of the judiciary. The supreme leader sets the general direction of the nation's policy, and there are no limits on the leader's term in office. The president of Iran, on the other hand, is elected by the citizens and is primarily responsible for the day-to-day administration of the government and the implementation of laws enacted by the legislature. So the authority belongs to the supreme leader, and the responsibility of execution is on the shoulders of the president. Myanmar or Burma has the military junta running the country, so it is not just one authoritarian, but a group of military officers who are at the helm. And of course, as we all know, Myanmar had a brief foray into democracy when Aung San Suu Kyi became its leader, but in 2021, Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested and deposed, and the military junta came back to power. So can dictatorships be ended and replaced by a democracy? Well, according to experts, military dictatorships are most likely to end in the near future and be replaced by a democracy. And the primary reason for that is the military is expected to defend the country, not run it. So the military can never convince the citizens that it needs to be running the country in the long run. Pakistan is a very good example because the military has often been at the forefront with interludes of democracy. But democracy has made its appearance because the military has not been able to hold power for too long. The other factor that determines the longevity of a dictatorship is the neighborhood. That is, the more democracies there are in the neighborhood, the less is the chance of a dictatorship to survive. And Spain is a shining example of this theory. In 1969, Francisco Franco handpicked Prince Juan Carlos, the grandson of King Alfonso XIII, to succeed him as the dictator of Spain. Juan Carlos had spent a good deal of time alongside Franco and publicly supported his regime. But soon after Franco's death in 1974, Juan Carlos pressed for change and immediately upon taking the throne, legalized the creation of political parties. He appointed Adolfo Suarez to form a government in 1976, and this was followed by the first democratically held elections in 1977. Spain has been a democracy since. The rest of Western Europe was all democracies, so Prince Juan Carlos just had to follow suit. However, the planning and the execution of Spain's transition into democracy is a case study in itself, and I will cover it in a subsequent episode. North Korea is in an opposite bucket, in the sense that in its neighborhood it has Russia and China, and both have dictators supporting its dictatorial regime. So the chances of North Korea coming out of a dictatorship do not seem very bright. The one regime that may be a good candidate to see an end to dictatorship is Iran. A very strong and vibrant middle class, which is educated and professional, cannot be run by an autocratic religious supremo for too long. But how long is too long? Your guess is as good as mine. And it is on that note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. The national language of Singapore is Malay, but it has 4 official languages. Which are these? In line with its major ethnic groups, the 4 official languages of Singapore are English, Chinese, Tamil, and Malay. So the answer is C, English, Chinese, Tamil, and Malay. Question for the current episode. Who has had the shortest stint as the dictator of any country? Is it A, King Umberto II of Italy, B, General H.M. Ershad of Bangladesh, C, Raul Castro of Cuba, or D, Joseph Goebbels of Germany? Once again, who has had the shortest stint as the dictator of any country? A, King Umberto II of Italy, B, General H.M. Ershad of Bangladesh, C, Raul Castro of Cuba, or D, Joseph Goebbels of Germany? The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. In the next episode, we take a look at the history of cinema, the impact from technology, and the evolution over time. Till then, stay safe and keep exploring the why in history.